Okay, hello everybody. Are you able to pick me up from, oh good. As Michael said, my name is Rich Ater, and I am a psychiatric nurse practitioner. I have been for 20-some years. Currently, as Michael said, I do work with an elderly population, but I have a pretty extensive experience working with trauma. I spent 8 years at the PTSD clinic at the American Lakes VA. I worked for 3 years at the King County Jail doing psychiatric intakes, but we don't talk about that anymore. And I've worked several years in community mental health. So I've come across trauma a lot. And what I want to do today is, because I was thinking about this, what is the best way to present a class on recovering from trauma, for people? And what occurred to me was a good thing to do would be some case studies. That, this is how we do it with new people in the field, is we actually teach them through case studies. So I'm going to go through some case studies that I think are kind of interesting. And while I do it, I'm going to discuss with you what goes on in the mind, in the brain, when trauma occurs. One thing I want to bring up before that is the fact that in our discernment this year of looking at spirituality through the body, the brain and the mind and so forth, on this plane of existence, everything you do, including your spirituality, comes through your body. Because it's, like I say, in this plane, your body is the median. I mean, that's where you take in your experiences. Things go on in your body, chemically and physically, and it's the conduit, I think, to your, to spirituality on this plane of existence. So that being said, the first case that I want to bring up, I got called into a case at a nursing home. This little old lady, she was in her 80s. She was originally from France. And she had an extensive psychiatric history. She'd been pretty much diagnosed with everything under the sun. And, it's interesting. It's been my experience that when you have all of these different diagnoses swimming around, and I had a very profound teacher tell me once, if you come up with a patient and they have named every diagnosis under the planet, they've been called anxiety disorder, they've been called major depression, they've been called bipolar disorder, all of that, you want to look for one of two things. Either you're dealing with a personality disorder or you're dealing with trauma. So that's what you want to explore. So I sat with this lady for a while, and she was in the early stages of dementia, I should bring up. And I wanted to get a little background. The way I always start with a new patient is I ask them questions about their past life, because I want to get to know them as a person, not just as a case. So I said, well, where were you born? And she said, well, in Lyon, France. Okay. Did you grow up in Lyon? Yeah, it turns out, she was a GI bride later on, but she spent World War II in Lyon. Now, I'm a history buff. And so I know Lyon was probably the site of some of the worst Nazi atrocities in France. So I started asking her a little bit about her family. And so what I found out was that she had 2 uncles and her father had all been shot by the SS for being involved in the underground. And, she had seen other horrible things too. So I was like, okay, so I started digging, and I said, it was clear she did not want to talk about this. She kept trying to change the subject on me. That's an important key trigger, avoidance. You want to avoid the trauma and talking about the trauma, because when you do, you emotionally relive it. And so I also started it. I said, listen, when you're talking about this, I said, I can see you're getting upset and nervous. Are you starting to feel like you were back there? And she said, yes. So then I started, do you have nightmares? Yeah, she has lots of nightmares. So I delved further into the symptoms, and it became obvious to me that, this woman was suffering from chronic PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, what happens to the brain when we have trauma? Okay, you have this, I should explain something about modern psychiatry first. The best way I've ever heard of describing modern psychiatry is they've given us this wonderful, intricate computer, and there's something wrong with it. And the only tools they've given us are a ball-peen hammer and a screwdriver. And by the way, they lost the schematic somewhere along the line. and this is what you're dealing with psychiatry today. I'm often reminded, if any of you have seen any of the Star Trek movies, there's one where they go back to planet Earth during our time. And Spock, Kirk, and McCoy are down there, and Chekhov, another character in the play, and please God, I hope you all know who these characters are. But in any event, he ended up getting shot, and he's in a hospital. And I remember the character of Dr. McCoy turns to Kirk and says, "My God, man, we can't leave him in the clutches of 20th century medicine." And it's kind of the truth. So, well, to get back, what happens with the brain? Normal memories are processed, they come in through our senses. The brain picks them out. The brain takes them to an area called the hippocampus. And the hippocampus, or hippocampus, however you want to pronounce it, which means little horse, because it looks like a little horse. And in Greek, hippocampus means little horse. So, in any event, it goes there, and the hippocampus is kind of like Grand Central Station. It's where everything goes in and gets processed. Okay? Traumatic memories do not go to the hippocampus because they are so atavistic, they are so primitive, they are so much a part of our fight and flight, system, that they go directly to a place called the amygdala. And the amygdala is a part of the brain, we call it the reptilian brain. Because we say it takes care of the 3 F's: fighting, fleeing, and reproduction. Wait, that'll catch up with you. So the memories go there, but the problem is, now the amygdala is trying to send them onto the hippocampus, but it keeps like slamming into the hippocampus and just can't get in. And while it's trying to get in, it manifests itself in different ways in the body, like emotionally reliving things, nightmares, stop me if you've heard this one, avoidance of the subject and that, because it's trying to get into the hippocampus to get integrated, and it can't. And that's why trauma is so tough. Now, keep in mind, this isn't new. The first descriptions in writing of post-traumatic stress disorder are in the Iliad. Homer writes about them. Then you go on. Julius Caesar describes them in some of his legionnaires and his thing on the Gallic Wars. Shakespeare in Henry V has a woman berating Henry about her husband and how he hasn't been the same since he returned from Agincourt. It was a big battle at the time. That you know, he's tossing and turning at night. He can't sleep. You know, he's constantly jumping, what we call accelerated startle response. And she's berating Henry about this. So this goes way back. We've called it by different names. Most of them attached, you know, to military things, because that's where we hit them out. And, like in the Civil War, it was called Soldier's Heart. It was called shell shock in World War I and battle fatigue in World War II. And, you know, during the Vietnam War, it was called "There's nothing wrong with you, get back to work." They, you know, it took a long time to get them to accept that, the VA, to accept that this is a disorder and we need to look at it. So in any event, let's get back to our little old lady for a second. So I've talked with her, and I've got this realm of symptoms, and I'm like, okay, I think she's got PTSD. Where do we go from here? You know, and there are treatments, and there are both medicinal treatments, pharmacological treatments, and non-pharmacological treatments. And a combination of both is what works best. So when you want to get someone on the stance, you know, of recovering from trauma, the first step is admittance, admitting that you have a trauma. You know, that it's nothing to be ashamed of, that anyone who went through what you went through would have this. We know this now. Far more soldiers coming back from war have PTSD than we ever thought. You know, it's not like just the occasional guy. So, you know, the first thing I did was place her on some medications, and the reason that I do that is because what the medications will do is they basically help to keep you, you know, a little bit calmer and not crawling out of your skin while we're working on therapy. Okay, so among the medications that I put around is one called Praises, and now this is an interesting medication because it started out as a high blood pressure pill and a pill for the treatment of benign prostatic hypertrophy, or an enlarged prostate, which I was pretty sure she didn't have. I seem to remember that from my anatomy classes. But what we discovered at the VA was that it also stops nightmares. Now you might ask how it does that, and I'll tell you, I don't know. None of us do. And the reason we don't is because the people who pay for research want to pay for research on drugs that they can make big money on. So it's the new drugs. Prazosin is an old drug. Prazosin costs roughly 25 cents per metric ton. I mean, it's like a month's supply without insurance of this med is about $2. Nobody's going to fund research on it. So we don't know why, but we just know it works. We found out because, we're at the VA. The Vietnam vets are getting older, and a lot of them are starting to have, those problems down there, enlarged prostates. And they have high blood pressure. So let's feed two birds with one seed. And let's give them the Prazosin and see how it works. And they come back, and it's like, well, your blood pressure's under fairly decent control now. How are you, peeing at night? That's gotten better too. But you know what, Doc? It's the strangest thing. Since I started taking those pills, my nightmares are gone. Okay. Well, when all of us are getting 20 patients a week telling us, hey, Doc, my nightmares are gone, something's up. So we started, giving it to folks. And this happened here at the VA here is where this was discovered. And so, yay, team. But so we started giving it to them, started writing, journal pieces and stuff, and now it's an accepted practice. So in any event, we're giving it to them. I also started her on a medication called sertraline. It's also called Zoloft. And it's an antidepressant, and antidepressants are also, good for anxiety. And they work on, which now I'm going to get back to the physical again for a second. They work on two neurotransmitters in the brain, norepinephrine and serotonin. And what they do is they allow more of them to stay in the body longer. This decreases depression and decreases anxiety. So I started her on these two meds. And a little bit of trazodone for sleep, but I think more knocking out the nightmares helps with people sleeping. Some people, by the way, don't remember their nightmares, that they've had them. So the other question I ask is, when you wake up in the morning, does your bed look like a battle zone? Are the pillows and everything all over the place? Are you waking up in a cold sweat? Is your bed soaking wet? Those tell me you're having nightmares. You're just not remembering them, which, may be a mercy. But in any event, so I start her on these meds. Now, I've got her to a place physiologically where she can handle therapy, because part of therapy is going to be going through the trauma again. I give her, and this is a great exercise. If any of you are plagued by bad dreams or nightmares, here's an exercise for you. When you get up in the morning, I want you to write out your dream in great detail. Everything that happened during that dream, that disturbing dream. Now I want you to write a new ending to it. Doesn't have to be a happy ending, but it has to be an ending that you can accept. Once you do that at night, as you're laying in bed, I want you to go through the dream with the new ending. And I want you to do it every night. And we have found that if you do that, that nightmare will eventually disappear for 80% of people. For the other 20, come on and see me. I've got this pill called Prazosin. But that is one of the non-ways you do it. Another thing that you do is you teach people mindfulness exercises. And you're doing that because when they have flashbacks, when they have intrusive memories, they can start to put themselves in a mindful state where, rather than being in the middle of whatever's going on in their head, they can step back and observe it. And this will help them to take that trauma and to find a door in the hypothalamus for it to go into. So there's both a physiological and a thing going on. There's a mental thing going on, and there's all these memories, from the past. So here's this lady, and within 6 months, she was doing so much better. She wasn't waking up at night screaming. Her mood had brightened throughout the day. She wasn't jumping out of her skin every time someone walked up behind her. So it was kind of a success story, as far as I was concerned. But that's one instance, and it points out one type of trauma. There are several. And ways to deal with it. Now, I had another one. This one here, he's a guy. He was a Vietnam vet. His assignment, and he was kind of a small guy. He didn't want to be a small guy in Vietnam, trust me, because the job they usually gave you was tunnel rat. You were the guy who climbed in and explored the tunnels with nothing but a flashlight and a .45. And you might be dropping into a whole army. And this guy, a big trigger for him was darkness. if he walked into a room and someone without thinking switched off the light, he'd have a total panic attack because he was back there again. And so once again, we talked about it. Now, I'm not going to go through the meds again because the thing with the medications is it's kind of one size fits all in a way. You might change the antidepressants you use, but it's going to be, in the same class and all that. So that's pretty much the same. When someone asked me once why I went into psychiatry, though, I told them, they said, well, you were a paramedic in Chicago. I'm surprised you're not in ER medicine or that. And I said, well, you know what? When you've dealt with one cardiac arrest, you've pretty much dealt with all cardiac arrests. When you've dealt with one diabetic emergency, you pretty much dealt with all diabetic emergencies. I've never met two people with schizophrenia or two people with major depression where I was dealing with the same thing. And it's the same thing with PTSD. Because people are different. Weird sometimes, but different. So I'm talking with this guy, and what I want to do with him is some desensitization. That thing of, triggers that it's like the minute you press that button, it's like this jolt goes right to the amygdala and says, it's time to relive your trauma. So the two things I'm going to do with this guy, I want to do desensitization. And the best way to do that is, once again, is to expose the person to the thing, but only after you've taught them mindfulness. And, mindfulness exercises. If I seem to be pushing that one a lot, it's because I'm doing a shameless advertisement for mindfulness exercises and mindfulness meditation. And if you haven't tried it, please do. It'll do wonders for you. In any event, so that's what we went through with him. And he was doing well. He wasn't having any flashbacks. One day he's driving in to the VA, and he was driving on a gravel road. A lot of these old boys, particularly at American Lakes, they live out on farms and places like that, and they have to travel the back roads and stuff, but they're happier out there. These are not guys who want to work in closed-in spaces. But he said, I was coming in, I'm going down this gravel road, and a piece of gravel flew up and dinged my car. And he said, for a minute I was back on a helicopter in Vietnam, getting shot at, because he said it happened all the time, there. I said, oh man, I'm sorry, that must have been tough. He said, oh no, Doc, it was like a ride at Disneyland without the ticket. So that was his way of looking at it. But what it told me too is he had developed a sense of humor about the traumatic events that occurred to him. Okay, and that's a good sign, because that's a sign of healing. Okay, when you can look at this stuff and it's not all doom and gloom for you, and you can laugh at some aspects, you're on your way. His nightmares are the lesson. The important thing for me is he was telling me he was in a restaurant and he went into the John, and while he was in the John, someone turned off the light for some reason. Rather than going to a panic attack, he just yelled, hey, I'm in here. Big change. Well, for one thing, when he was back there in Nam in the tunnels, the last thing he would have done was yelled out, hey, I'm in here. But the fact of the matter is, he could do that now. He could recognize, okay, somebody turned off the light. I'm not in a tunnel in Cu Chi, So, these are things where you have traumas in your life. And now I'm going to switch gears a little and tell you we all, to some extent, have traumas in our life. They may not be as severe as those that I just mentioned, but we all have them. You know, something rotten that happened during your childhood. Maybe someone bullied you. Maybe, one day, mom or dad just, flipped off the handle because they had other stressors. And, folks don't think about this much. I mean, they don't, when they do this. But the people they do it to can often carry those memories for years. I mean, even if you're a child especially. But even as adults. So when you have trauma in your life, a recurring thought or something that you find really disturbing, I'm not saying you got full-blown PTSD, but, you might have, like a thought that's disturbing, or you might have a bad dream that keeps popping up. Understand that this is normal. You're not alone in this. And it is most definitely okay to talk about it. Either to a good friend or to, someone like me. Oh, I love it. No, that's cool. I was just excited. I was like, is there a duck in here? But, yeah, go ahead. We'll wait. So, people have different, traumas and that in their lives. And this is a chance, if you look at it as an opportunity to learn something about yourself, to learn, to use techniques like mindfulness, meditation. If it's a nightmare, use that exercise that I use. That's part of creative visualization. I try not to use too many technical terms here because then I got to bill you. But it's like, but you get a chance to use these things and to help you, to make, people who think, God, sitting there in meditation, well, how does that make my life any richer? Well, I'm giving you a way where it does. It can make your life richer. You can handle traumas. You can also learn a great spiritual exercise, which is called forgiveness in doing this. Now, when you forgive, understand, forgiveness doesn't mean you're saying, hey, it's all right, that, what you did to me is all right. It's what you're saying is, this happened to me, and I'm no longer going to carry that luggage with me. And that's all you're saying. You're putting down that knapsack. You're not going to carry it anymore. And what happens when you do that is that also it makes physiological changes in your brain. We've done this. We've studied. Now we have enough tools now that we can start to study what goes on in the brain during trauma and during the treatment of trauma. And you develop new neural pathways. You develop ways in which your hippocampus opens more to these experiences and can let them in and can process them. Even the lobes of your brain change to an extent when these things happen. So you have these things happening. And this is important because the neurological system is not alone. Okay, there's other systems in the body too, and they get affected. For example, you're thinking of trauma. You're thinking of something bad that happened to you. Okay, your heart starts beating a little bit faster. There are these little glands on top of your kidneys, and they start producing something called cortisol. Cortisol is catabolic. What does catabolic mean? It means it eats stuff. In this case, what it's eating is your immune system. You know, anabolic, you know, builds things up. You've heard of anabolic steroids. Don't take them. You know, they build things up. Catabolic tears things down. So now you have something in your body that tears apart your immune system, that tears apart your cardiovascular system, you know, and that eats away at your brain too. Because anything that happens in, you know, the experiences that you go through in your, I'll say your mind-world interface, doesn't just affect the neurological system, it's also handled by the endocrinological system. You know, the glands, the pineal and the thymus and so forth. So when you do these exercises, when you work on these things, you build up. This is an anabolic thing. This is an anabolic you can take. But it builds things up in you. It makes your body stronger. So this is why it's important to do it. And it also shows you that there is this interface between the world and you and your spirituality. Apparently the Dalai Lama and Deepak Chopra were right. But we're doing more and more studies on this, and we're finding out more and more about these interfaces. It used to be, you know, in the study of medicine, we used to have a joke back when I was very young, which shows you, I mean, from the time of my, you know, I'll say 30s until now when I'm a little older, until now when I'm in my 60s, how much things have changed. We used to tell a joke that there were two guys up in a hot air balloon, and they're floating, and they're 20 feet over this, they're totally lost, they have no idea where they are. And they're like 20 feet above this hill, and there's this little guy standing on the hill. So they shout down, "Hey pal, can you help us out here? We're lost, can you tell us where we are?" And the guy says, "Yeah, you're 20 feet above me in a hot air balloon." Well, the one guy in the hot air balloon turns to the other guy and says, "You know, he's got to be a neurologist. The information's essentially correct, and there's nothing we can do with it." Yeah. No. Well, now we're getting to the point where there's stuff we can do with it. I'm going to leave you with one last case study, and this is to show you how these things work. This wasn't a patient I was treating. I was an expert witness in a case of elder abuse. And there was this little old lady. She was she was severely demented. And she had clearly been physically abused. You know, we knew this for a fact. The woman had been sent to the hospital. She had bruises all over her body. The nursing home tried to say, well, you know, she fell out of bed. And I did an exam on her. I'm like, listen, to sustain these injuries, she would not only have had to fall out of bed, she would have had to bounce 16 times. I mean, she's covered in bruises, poor thing, right? And now she's terrified. It's like she's shaking like a leaf, right? And then on top of it, while I'm trying to interview her, interviewing demented patients is tough. And what you do a lot of times is you depend on caregivers to give you information. I couldn't do that with this, you know, nursing home. She was out of that home by now, and anyways. But, you know, I tried to interview the caregiver she had, and I interviewed family, you know, to try and get some more information. And suddenly, during the middle of my interview with her, because I'm trying to assess long and short-term memory, you know, she starts crying that she's a good girl and she doesn't want to do that. Well, you know, I've got bottle rockets going off in my head. So, first thing I do is I call the family and I say, listen, was she ever abused when she was younger, you know, sexually abused? And they, to their knowledge, no. And she'd never made statements like that before. So I'm thinking, did this happen at that nursing home? Now, they brought up a witness, their side, because, both sides brings up their witnesses. And they hired this neurologist who said, because I was saying, okay, she's developing PTSD. And they said she can't have PTSD because she doesn't have a memory. She has dementia. Well, the argument that I used is she doesn't have normal memory. Her hippocampus is shot. Okay, her frontal lobes are, they've shrunk. She's got what we call used ventricular spaces. She has, plaques and that. She has a dementia brain. And I said, but that's not how traumatic memories work. So, we go back to our old buddy, the hippocampus. And it doesn't change with dementia. The reptilian brain stays the same because, if it didn't, you'd stop eating, you'd stop drinking, just a lot of physiological functions would go by the wayside. So I made the case that, yeah, she does have PTSD. These memories, they're not processed like normal memories, and dementia's not going to stop them. In the middle of this case, the woman, passed on. And at least, when she did, she passed on to a place where she was safer and better treated. But the point that I'm making with this case is here is a physiological response, that manifests itself, and it manifests itself psychiatrically. And it shows, though, that, these functions occur. And if you look at dementia, I heard, oddly enough, it was a Middle Eastern philosopher, a guy named Abdu'l-Baha, who's, part of the Baha'i faith, who described dementia as a mirror, a mirror with dust on it. So everything's still there, it's just covered. And some things are there that you don't think are there. Okay, it's amazing. Like, for example, Michael Karen and I have this friend. Oddly enough, his name is Rich. It's a fine name. But it's not me, by the way. But he goes out and plays music at nursing homes. And you'll notice something. When he's playing the old songs, he's brought this up to me. And I've seen it in other places too. And UW is actually doing a study on it right now. When you start singing the old songs, it seems like some of the cognition comes back. And we thought with dementia, man, once that cognition is gone, it's gone. No, not necessarily. Stuff like this, it sparks something and some of the cognition goes back. I've noticed in doing mochas, now what a mocha is that it's not a drink from Starbucks. It stands for Montreal Cognitive Assessment. And, it's like the mini mental status exam without a patent. And so I get improved scores right after people have attended a musical thing like this. And, if I go and take the same test 6 hours later, score's right back where it was. I'm really thinking of talking these guys into pumping Benny Goodman over the speakers all the time. But we're finding out about things like this. We're finding out more about the physiology of the mind. We used to have this very dualistic concept of like mind and spirit are separate from body. And more we're discovering, that just ain't true. This idea that there's this dualism there is an illusion. It's a trick of the nervous system. And fine, while you're living here, you gotta go with it. But it is a trick of the nervous system. And so more and more we're finding this out. And knowing this in trauma, is a huge tool towards helping us to help people to overcome trauma. You know, now I'm lucky in many ways, and I'm lucky because I have PTSD. I have it from when I was on the fire department. But it helps me a lot in understanding my patients. It's like, you remember last summer when you had that smell of the smoke from the forest fires and stuff? Oh, what a rocking summer that was for me. I was having dreams and flashbacks like you wouldn't believe. It's like funny, my kid called and say, "Hey, Dad, how you doing?" "I'm fine. The minute I crawl out from under this roof, I'll be, But, so you had it helped me, and it helped me a lot at the VA with understanding what's, what it feels like. What what those nightmares feel like. What intrusive thoughts feel like. What it's like when, something has sparked a memory and you can't get it out of your mind, no matter how hard you try. And that's, once again, I'll make another shameless advertisement for it. That's where mindfulness comes in, because what mindfulness tells you is, don't even try and push it out of your head, because you can't. Observe it. See where it leads you. I'm going to leave you with one story. And then I want to invite questions, okay, because I love interactive. I love questions. I was once married. I'm over it now. No. I was once married. And we went back to Iowa to visit with my wife at the time's parents. She grew up in rural Iowa. I mean, she grew up in an Anchorage. It's weird because we drive out here and we did suburbs. I said, "Well, we're in country." She goes, "You have no idea what in the country means." Because she was like, her closest neighbor was a mile away. So we go there. And one night, I cooked for all of them. I'm a fairly decent cook, and Tree asked me if I'd cook Greek for them because that's my background. And I said, "Yeah, sure," right? So the only reason I bring that up is that everyone in the family was over there, including her grandfather. Now, there's a thing in Midwestern culture. If you want to discuss anything important, you must be at the kitchen table with a pot of coffee. Because there is no other place where it is permissible to discuss something important. I'm an old Chicago boy, so I know this. That and the fact that goodbyes when you're leaving need to last 30 minutes and be done at the doorstep. So, well, in any event, so everyone else is gone to bed, and there's me and her grandfather, Pappy, and we're sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. Pappy looks at me. He says, "So, Teresa Ann tells me you were a fireman in Chicago." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "I was attached to a rescue squad, and I was a paramedic too." He goes, "Oh, were you ever shot at?" And I said, "Well, yeah, as a matter of fact, I was shot once and stabbed twice in the line of duty." And he's like, "Oh." So then he starts telling me about D-Day. And he went on and on about how terrified he was and where things were going with this, right? So I spent the whole night listening to him talk about D-Day. He ends up going home. The next morning, I'm at the kitchen table. I'm all bleary-eyed because I haven't slept, and I'm not 20 anymore, when I could do that. And the family, her mom asked me, "So what did you and Pappy talk about all night?" I said, "Oh, he was telling me about D-Day." Dead silence. You could have heard a pin drop. Apparently, he had never talked about it to anybody. And it was interesting. The only thing I can come up with is he talked to me about it because I could understand how scared he was. But it's an interesting story, and it shows he carried this trauma with him. He was 80 when I was talking with him, and he carried this trauma with him till the day he died. So we all have traumas, but now we have, we have something we can do about it. It's like Buddha's third noble truth: there is a way out. So, that being said, does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
When you talk about teaching people mindfulness exercises, can you be more specific about what you teach them?
Sure. The first step we teach them is we teach them basic meditation first, because that's the first step, So, you may do it through a word, through a mantra. People often do it that way. I'm a Sufi, so every morning, one thing I do is called dhikr, as an example. And that's using a phrase, either, the name of God or an attribute of God or something like that. So you may sit there and say, like, Allahu, or something like that, like, La ilaha illallah, and you'll say it like 99 times. 99 to 100 times, I should say. And what it does is, by doing this, and, getting up every morning and then again every evening, doing it again, is it teaches you concentration. Because from there, once you can learn that concentration, the next step is learning how to sit in silence. And when you can focus like that, because, you've done this, either that or, using a Hindu Buddhist rosary and saying, something 108 times, like, Hum Mani Padme Hum or something like that. You can, you learn to focus. Then you learn, you can go from that. We teach them, and we don't tell them they got to say something religious. You can repeat the word one, just something to focus on. And from there, you teach them to sit in silence. And when they can learn to sit in silence, then you start going through the thing of, okay, guys, now, when a trauma occurs, I want you to sit in silence. I want you to stop what you're doing. I want you to sit in silence, and I want you to run that trauma through your head like a movie you're watching. Okay. And when you've watched it and observed it enough times, I want you to go in and change the ending. And that's pretty much what we teach them. Another way we do it, I had a guy, he was on a fishing boat in Alaska, and the boat started taking in water. I guess, the pumps had frozen, they couldn't fix it, started taking in water. They had to get escorted back to the port by the Coast Guard to make sure that they made it back, and didn't sink on the way. Because it was scary. I mean, they didn't know whether they were going to sink or not. And on top of it, they've got like 100-foot waves going over them and stuff. It was scary, because I saw the Coast Guard, when they were escorting them in, also were taking pictures. A film of it, so, I got to see the film. And this guy, when he wasn't out fishing, he was a tiler. He would go and retile bathrooms and stuff. That's what he did for a living. So he gets back from this experience, and he's living in Seattle, and he gets a job up in Squim. Now, if you don't know where Squim is, it's on the peninsula. And to get there, you've got to take a ferry. And so he goes in, he pays his fare, and the minute he drives onto the boat, he faints. You know, luckily the car was stopped by that. And I think it's like, you know, the minute he felt, you know, the ferry like rocking a little, he fainted. Could not get on a ferry. Now, this is going to be a problem because he has jobs over in the peninsula he needs to do and stuff. And so what we did was, we did do the mindfulness thing here, but it wasn't as much with flashbacks in this case as it was with desensitization. You know, so I taught him the techniques, and once he had them, I said, now I know you're driving, okay, so you're going to do mindfulness with your eyes open. Because believe it or not, you can do it while you're doing other things, but you know, it takes a little more skill. So I had to go through that, and I was like, what I want you to do is, as we get on the boat, because I went with him, I want you to, you know, when you start getting on the boat, I want you to observe it. You know, you've already done some relaxation exercises, so you kind of relax. I want you to observe what you're doing here. You know, I want you to, as you're observing it, I want you to realize too, bring yourself back to the fact that you're not in Alaska and you're not on a fishing boat in the middle of the Bering Sea. Okay, you're here in Puget Sound. You know, believe me, it's not as boring, or it's far more boring. And we did that, and we did it about 10, 20 times, I think, till he got to the point where he could drive on the ferry by himself and not, you know, pass out or freak out. And, you know, but the first step in mindfulness is learning concentration. And you do that through, you know, that's why it's like, you know, the Sufi peers and the Hindu gurus and that, and when they would give people these mantras and these dhikr exercises, you know, they knew what they were doing. It was more than just, oh God, I'm giving you a prayer. It was, I'm teaching you how to concentrate so you can handle the bigger stuff. And then you go on to the bigger stuff. You go on to the point where you can sit in silence. And when memories or thoughts come in, they're not all traumatic. I mean, you know, sometimes, you know, what pops in your head is, I really need to paint the ceiling. But whatever they are, you can learn, you know enough concentration now that you can sit in silence and just watch them go by. You know, the big mistake beginners make is trying to push them out of your head. You will never do that. You know, it's not how your brain is, or your mind is built.